Of course.
I'm Debbie Grinnell. I'm staff at the C10 Foundation and was a founding board member. I would like to answer the question that Bruce asked you, because I've looked closely at the documentation. In the year 2009, NextEra knew they had ASR because it is visually inspected according to code. The petrographic results were in May of 2010, and the pod that they produced, Region 1, you became very aware that you needed some technical assistance, as they had not included the degraded concrete in their calculations. So the pod was bogus. You knew it was, and you asked for technical assistance, and that took months. So the answer to your question is that the plant was not within any known operable state from 2009 through to 2011. But I have comments to make. The C10 Foundation and UCS requested our expert, Paul Brown, who served on multiple U.S. and international code committees, to assess NextEra's Enclosure 2. What we understood the basis of this meeting to be about is you issued a CAL, and NextEra was obligated to respond to that, which they did in 2 enclosures. Enclosure 2 includes their consultants' response to your CALs. According to Brown, NextEra's consultants have presented a hypothesis concerning the impact of the ASR on safety-related buildings at Seabrook. The primary basis for the hypothesis is that confinement reduces cracking. This is not proved. It is a hypothesis, unpublished, and not peer-reviewed. Confinement may and likely does reduce crack displacement, but no evidence has been provided that the total length of the cracks is reduced. Their hypothesis further claims that the expansion due to ASR may actually enhance the structural capacities of the affected buildings. This is a strategically convenient position, but no evidence has been provided to support the claim that the properties of the concrete have changed beyond those recognized in ASTM standards C39 and 42, just because they were removed from the structure. In areas where restraint by reinforcement is absent, initially formed microcracks grow and macroscopic cracking is observed, or crack widening. In areas where there is restraint by reinforcement, the process that leads to cracking, widening are inhibited. However, there is no evidence to indicate that cracking is inhibited in restraint, but rather that in those areas they produce high density of microcracks. ASR-induced expansion in areas of restraint cause softening. This is important. Softening as they produce high-density networks of microcracks, as NextEra reported in section 3.1, and I quote, a high degree of cracking in the cover of containment. A crack index, which only considers crack width, is not an appropriate measure of an expansive reaction in a structure restrained by reinforcement. The total length of cracks on a given cross-sectional plane is required to determine the extent of ASR. ASR microcracking directly affects the concrete's stiffness and tensile strength. As concrete general fails in tension, getting core results of compression strength, splitting tensile strength, and elastic moduli to accurately reveal the reductions in the expansive reaction are key. No splitting tensile strength determinations have been done. Why? Cores were taken and held back by NextEra despite the recommendation of their consultants. And the NRC has not requested that they be done. Have you requested the cores be tested for tensile strength? There were 4, I think, or maybe 5, that were removed and held back. Can you commit to doing those?
We did not ask for those cores to be tested yet, but I will mention that we are still reviewing that to determine what additional testing, what additional sampling may need to be done. So that's something we intend to look at in the future as we go on in this next inspection.
Okay, well, under section 415, as a conclusion, they state the presence of the reinforcing steel limits the ability of the concrete to expand, but what they don't say is that the concrete will continue to lose its strength and stiffness and can turn to mush. As the concrete deteriorates, it will soften to the point of failure, therefore in turn causing a safety system to fail. Their claim that ASR stiffens the structure may be presently true, but its continual progression will soften the structure as the moduli of the concrete is reduced. What they don't state is the fact that the concrete will soften and weaken. ASR is an active cracking progression that is not linear and will continue and intensify. There are no shortcuts here. ASR lab testing must be accurate, aggressive, and frequent on actual Seabrook concrete taken from the plant and not based on research. The authors of this hypothesis appear to be ignoring that the actual Seabrook data be used in favor of mathematical analysis carried out by their structural engineer in Texas. As Seabrook is the first in the nuclear industry to demonstrate extensive and marked ASR concrete degradation, and the NRC had no technical, no regulatory basis for ASR, the NRC must require a comprehensive extent of condition on all of Seabrook's buildings and structures with actual, not virtual data from concrete at Seabrook using appropriate acceptance criteria from codes and standards to achieve a baseline database. NextEra was not trained nor ACI certified to make accurate visual inspections, which is why the ASR concrete became extensive in the first place and moderate to severe in areas. The NRC has stated in several documents over the past 2 years.
Wrap it up, please. We got other people who want to ask questions. You can't.
If you don't interrupt me, thank you.
Yes.
That NextEra has used and continued to use the wrong, and you guys really have to do something about this, have continued to use the wrong acceptance criteria for NRC required inspections. The NRC should stop politely pointing it out multiple times to NextEra that they are using the wrong criteria and act like regulators and tell them to use the right ones. NextEra cannot develop an age management plan, I'm not finished,
Debbie, you have to
until
be considerate of the others. Please.
plan under their current license for extensive ASR
No, thank you.
based on,
Sit down, please.
okay, I just really want to make this point. Thank
Okay, make
you.
your point so we can move on to the next person, please. Thank you. You have to be
Okay.
considerate of all the people here.
Under their current license for extensive ASR degradation based on a replica project in Texas based on research data derived from an unproven hypothesis. It's really absurd. If there is any benefit to be derived from this research project in Texas, it must be held to the gold standard because of the importance to ensure public safety as concrete serves as the barrier to protect the public from radiation exposure in any accident or seismic event. A hypothesis must be supported by citation of peer-reviewed journal articles. Regardless, the NRC must not allow the research to be utilized instead of the ACI and ASTM code conformance, which is federal code. Can you tell me, here's my question, can you tell me why you closed out on item 10 when you stated in multiple documents and currently in a recent inspection that NextEra has used and continues to use acceptance criteria for combined crack index and individual width criteria that's not acceptable. The NRC staff from your headquarters have confirmed that detailed investigation and structural evaluation is appropriate if the ICCI is greater than 0.5 millimeters per meter, and for an individual crack width is greater than 0.2 for nuclear plant concrete structures that are important to safety and exposed to groundwater. NextEra repeatedly has used 1.0 and continues to double the value. And you signed off, you closed on item 10 when your own staff have repeatedly told NextEra, you are using the wrong criteria. This is not the criteria that's used for a nuclear plant. This is an active, ongoing problem that requires this kind of visual attention to monitoring, because these cracks matter. And you are not insisting that they use the right one, and on top of that, you've now signed off on an item using the wrong criteria. Can you answer that
Debbie, real
question?
quick, the commitment was to complete an initial set of measurements. They did that. We are still reviewing whether that set of measurements is the final answer for the complete monitoring of the structures.
Richard, they used the wrong criteria, and what they established was, you're not gonna give me the mic back.
Well, just a time check. We went through 4 questions, and we've gone through 50 minutes with
They
4
identified.
questions.
Thank
And we
you.
have 20 other
All
people.
right, please stop talking.
We have 20 other people, and it's not considered to the 20 other people who want to ask questions. So if you just let them answer the question, if we get time, we'll get back to you.
They used the criteria that they self-imposed upon themselves, and that's still under review.
You closed off on the item. You have repeatedly allowed them to use the wrong criteria, and the reason it's a concern is they identified 131 areas to trend and then decided only 20 of them met the criteria. How are we to know that the 131 wouldn't fit?
Because we're going to continue monitoring it.
Then-
The
then you need to
closeout
open
doesn't
that item
necessarily
tonight.
mean it's the end of the story.
Then open item 10 and admit that you
If
haven't
I
done
may,
your
Debbie, to
job.
try to set the record straight, yes, we did close confirmatory action item number 10. The commitment that the licensee made to us was to perform the first 6-month interval measurements and
They were
submit
incorrect
that for our review. They did that. We looked at that submittal. We also very specifically looked at the methodology that they were using to ensure that it was at least well-defined and that the procedure that they used was appropriately implemented. The scope of that inspection was just to look at that aspect. We very clearly state in the report that the use of crack mapping or crack indexing is still under review by the NRC as a means to monitor the structures at the facility. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're going to be looking at their structures monitoring program. Their structures monitoring program currently entails just crack indexing.
I'm sorry.
That is under review.
I'm
We're continuing to
sorry.
look at that, and when we make a final judgment as to its adequacy,
Yeah.
we'll have that in the report as
I'm
well.
sorry to correct you, that in your closing of item 10, you used the wrong crack index in your coverage. So, do you not know? I mean, are your research people who write the requests for additional information the only ones who do know what the correct numbers are?
I'm not
It
sure I
has been
understand your question,
repeated.
but I'd be happy to discuss it
They
with you.
have doubled the
further.
value, which means we're losing cracks that need monitoring. We have no idea out of 131, how many of those with the acceptable criteria should be trended and watched closely.
I think we have that information, and I can discuss that
Can
with
you,
you.
yes, can you do that
Outside
out for
this
me,
this
maybe
forum.
on the side somewhere?